Journeys of Return and Redemption. Ezra Chapter 1, The Generative Heart. The soft hum of a high-end workstation fan was the only sound inside the production room as Alex Rivera adjusted his microphone arm, the green audio level bars bouncing cleanly on his primary monitor. Across the wide oak console, Thomas was already checking his printed schematics of the ancient Persian trade routes, his pencil hovering over the rugged terrain between Babylon and the Judean hills, while Sophia leaned back in her chair, her fingers lightly tracing the worn edges of a leather notebook filled with family genealogies. The sheer administrative inertia of an empire doesn't just dissolve because people are homesick, Thomas said, his deep voice instantly grounding the pre-show technical check as he pointed to the logistical markers. To move tens of thousands of people across a vast, unforgiving desert requires more than a poetic dream. It takes a staggering amount of structural alignment, diplomatic clearing, and raw, hard-nosed funding. Sophia nodded softly, looking up with an expression of quiet intensity. But that is exactly where the heartbeat of this narrative lies, Thomas. It isn't just about the clearance of physical borders or the signing of an imperial passport. It is the sudden, overwhelming psychological shock of families who have spent 70 years planting gardens and building houses in captive soil, suddenly having their internal security disrupted by a prompt they cannot ignore. Alex Rivera checked the digital clock on the wall, tapped his headset, and brought the master fader up to clear the line. Welcome back to Journeys of Return and Redemption. Today we are standing on the absolute threshold of a new era, crossing the historic boundary line into the opening chapter of the Book of Ezra. For 70 long years, the skyline of Jerusalem had been a distant, smoky memory, preserved only in the tearful prayers of old men by the canals of Babylon, its walls broken down, its holy sanctuary burned to ash by Nebuchadnezzar. But empires rise and fall like shifting tides in the sand, and the Babylonian superpower has just been systematically dismantled by Cyrus the Great, the monarch of Persia. What we are observing in Ezra chapter 1 is not a slow, painful military rebellion or a desperate underground escape, but a sudden, top-down bureaucratic disruption that originates from the highest throne in the ancient world. Dr. Naomi adjusted her reading glasses, pulling a stack of cuneiform text translations and historical timelines into alignment on her desk space. The precision of the timing here is historically breathtaking, Alex, because the text explicitly anchors this event to the first year of Cyrus, king of Persia. From an imperial strategy standpoint, Cyrus completely flipped the script on how previous empires managed conquered populations. Instead of utilizing the brutal Assyrian or Babylonian model of forced deportation and cultural erasure to maintain control, Cyrus issued decrees, much like the famous Cyrus cylinder discovered by archaeologists, allowing displaced groups to return to their native lands and rebuild their traditional sanctuaries. But Ezra looks past the political calculations of the Persian court to expose the true engine driving the decree, stating explicitly that this administrative shift happened to fulfill the word of Yahweh spoken through Jeremiah, who had predicted a precise 70-year limit on the desolation. Rabbi Jonah leaned forward, his hands clasped over a large rabbinic commentary as his voice filled the studio with warm, rhythmic cadence. You see, Naomi, the historical mechanics are fascinating, but the linguistic choice in the Hebrew text is what completely shatters standard political science. The author writes that Yahweh stirred up here the spirit of Cyrus. That is the exact same terminology used throughout the scriptures for awakening someone from a deep, heavy sleep or mobilizing a warrior for a definitive campaign. This absolute pagan king, a man who didn't covenantally know the God of Abraham, becomes an unwitting instrument of divine fidelity, issuing a herald both orally throughout the public squares and via written imperial dispatches. Cyrus's decree doesn't just grant a casual permission slip to leave. It legally charges the returning remnant to build a house for Elohim in Jerusalem, and then places a mandatory taxation or subsidy on the local populations, ordering neighbors to pack the departing exiles' bags with silver, gold, goods, and livestock, alongside free will offerings for the temple layout. Father Elias turned a crisp page in his theological lexicon, his eyes bright as he traced the internal parallels within the narrative architecture. This is a profound manifestation of cosmic sovereignty, Jonah, because it reveals that the human heart, even the heart of a foreign emperor holding absolute geopolitical dominance, remains entirely accessible to the breath of the Creator. And notice the immediate, symmetrical response within the community itself. The text states that the heads of the fathers' houses of Judah and Benjamin, the priests and the Levites, stood up to move out, specifically everyone whose spirit God had stirred. The same divine breath that unlocked the mind of the Persian king on his throne simultaneously unlocks the paralyzed imaginations of the captive remnant by their hearths, breaking the heavy psychological inertia of decades of exile life. Thomas tapped his index finger against the ledger columns of his printed research notes, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the sudden influx of material capital into the movement. If you look closely at the closing movement of this chapter, you see that this return is not a disorganized shoestring migration. It is a highly secure, heavily subsidized treasury transfer. Cyrus orders Mithridath, the royal treasurer, to open the high-security imperial vaults and release the original golden and silver vessels that Nebuchadnezzar had plundered from the Jerusalem temple in 586 BC. For 70 years, those sacred basins, bowls, and knives had been stored inside the house of Babylon's false gods, treated as trophies of an absolute military conquest. Mithridath counts them out item by item onto a formal administrative manifest: 30 gold basins, 1,000 silver basins, 29 replacement knives, 30 gold bowls, 410 double-sorting silver bowls, and 1,000 other vessels, handing the entire ledger over to Sheshbazzar, the prince of Judah. Dr. Naomi nodded, her pen marking the final sum on her page. The total tally reaches 5,400 holy items of gold and silver carried up out of the darkness of Babylon's treasure houses, back into the light of Jerusalem. This is an incredible public reversal of historical trauma. The very objects that marked the catastrophic end of the First Temple now become the material guarantee and foundational assets of the Second. Sophia leaned toward her microphone, her voice carrying a deep, empathetic resonance that shifted the tone of the round table toward immediate personal reflection. Think about what it practically meant to carry those 5,400 vessels across those hundreds of miles of wilderness sand. Every single golden bowl resting in the saddlebags was a heavy, metallic proof that God had not forgotten his name, his place, or his people. For an everyday family walking that road, looking at their children who had been born in a foreign land and had never seen a single stone of Jerusalem, those vessels were a tangible reminder that no season of captivity, no matter how long, painful, or deeply entrenched it feels, can ever compromise the structural reliability of a divine promise. It challenges us to look at the areas in our own lives where we have settled into our own Babylons, normalizing our states of spiritual displacement or emotional non-completion, and to ask ourselves if we are ready to respond when the Spirit stirs our environment to bring us home. Father Elias smiled warmly, resting his hand near his Bible cover. Exactly, Sophia. It shows us that true redemption is never a vague, abstract theory. It is a literal packing of bags, a systematic counting of gold, and a real-world movement out of captive territory. When the structural boundaries of human engineering seem permanent, a sovereign intervention can rewrite the laws of empires overnight, turning the spoils of a pagan conqueror into the instruments of a restored covenant life. Alex Rivera adjusted the master fader one final time, looking out through the studio glass as the closing music theme began to bleed cleanly into the production line. The ledger is closed, the vessels are packed, and the first wave of returnees is officially marching south toward the ruins of Judah to lay stone upon stone in the dust. Next week, our journey through this restoration movement takes us straight into the highly detailed, bureaucratic census of Ezra chapter 2, where we will examine the specific family lines, priests, and servants who risked their security to register their names in the household of return. Alex Rivera. I'm Alex Rivera, and this has been Journeys of Return and Redemption,